Hey, I have something to say. I have something that I feel like I really need to address. So, there was this event that was held here in Iceland, in the spiritual community here in Iceland, that I want to talk about, and I want to talk about a lot of things involved. It might be triggering for some because I'm going to be talking about childhood sexual abuse and the consequences of that. Okay. So anyway, there was this event that was held last weekend, and in this event, people were invited to explore, different sides of love, including erotic love, so eros, erotic passionate love, philia, love of friends. I'm now reading from the event description. Storge, the love of parents for children, agape, love of mankind. So this was like a partly erotic exploration, according to the event. I didn't go there, but looking at the event, that looks, if they're exploring the erotic passionate love, erotic passionate love. I think we know what it means. And then they were also, I'm gonna read a little bit more. So Saturday night we will connect with all of these different vibrational realities, allowing ourselves to explore and understand them even more deeply. This is a unique event where parents are able to bring their children along with them. It doesn't say that where children are, invited to bring their parents along, but parents are invited to bring their children along. I have a reason why I'm saying this. As we will be acting as one community, sharing in the language of love in every way possible, not just erotically. An emphasis, not just erotically, but I'm assuming because, why does she have to say that? Because there's definitely be a focus on the erotica, but not just that, but there's going to be an erotic exploration. Okay, through the meditative practice of dance in combination with sacred medicine, and there's a picture of mushroom. So sacred medicine, what she's talking about is psychedelic mushrooms and cacao. We'll reconnect with our subconscious mind and uncover our hidden patterns of relating. We'll explore in depth who we are in our romantic partnerships, friendship, and parental roles. We'll celebrate the beautiful connections that exist within and between us, clean blockages, and etc., etc. Anyway, so there was an event where we were exploring erotic sides of ourselves, erotic love, and psychedelic mushrooms, and then people were invited to bring their children along. And then later on, when she was asked to explain what she meant, she said, well, actually, when I said children, I meant people 18 and older. And I think, first of all, I have problems with believing that, because when the phrasing is not that, does not imply that in any way. The understanding of what we have of children, most people, when we say children, we mean like 18 and younger. We don't mean 18 and older. So I have problems with believing that she meant people 18 and older when she said, but parents are able to bring their children along. Anyway. And so, okay, so we have an event where you're mixing erotic exploration, psychedelic mushrooms, and if you have not had an experience with psychedelic mushrooms, then I can tell you it changes your perception of reality in a big way. And in my personal opinion, and opinion of I think most people, you're maybe not a fit parent under the influence of psychedelic mushrooms. So first of all, I have big questions with inviting children into an experience where the parents and possibly everybody around them is taking psychedelic mushrooms, because then there's nobody that is sane enough, there enough to properly take care of the children. And because there's no thing in this like, they can't be younger than 5 or they can't be younger than 10. There's nothing like that. It's just, invited to bring their kids along. Anyway, and then first of all, psychedelic mushrooms in children, iffy. It's like, in my opinion, don't do it. And then there's this erotic exploration along with it, which is the part that I'm going to be talking about, because this woman, 3 days ago, she wrote a blog post on a blog that she has. It's called devotedsounds.com. You can look at it if you want. And I'm going to read to you from this blog post where she was answering the criticism that she had been having because of this event. And so, quoting from her blog post, we want to ask, do you support sex between adults and children? First of all, an educated opinion, there's no such thing as sex between adults and children. There's sexual abuse between adults and children. There's no such thing as sex. Okay, again, we want to ask, do you support, and this, I will tell you all about why this is an educated opinion of mine. And okay, we want to ask, do you support sex between adults and children, and get a clear-cut answer. I use this specific example because this is the question 2 different reporters asked me yesterday and the day before. I told them that to answer this question thoroughly, I would need at least a 1-hour-long conversation, and that I have not researched this topic enough to have an educated opinion on this. So a woman, I'm going to read a little bit further, but so this woman that is creating an event where she is inviting parents to bring their children into an experience where this erotic exploration and psychedelic immersion. She says herself she does not know enough about this to even say what she thinks about this, having, sex between adults and children. And okay, they wanted a yes or no answer, something clear and simple. But a clear-cut answer is an answer without integrity, because it does not allow for the complexity and diversity that is inherent to all life. For example, how do you define an adult? How do you define a child? What do you define as support? Which I don't know, maybe there's something, in the further in the article that, justifies why she's talking about support. And how does choice fit into all of this? The personal will, feelings, and chosen behavior of 2 individuals. Okay, first of all, I have to say, all of this reeks of somebody that has no understanding of childhood sexual abuse and the consequences of it, and has no understanding of childhood psychological development, because there's talking about, personal will, feelings, and chosen behavior of 2 individuals, and where she's talking about sex between adults and children. And because there's lots of things, like, for example, a child, and okay, so she's confused about what a child is and an adult is. Let's just, I think we can all agree, children are somebody that's up to maybe 12, 13, 14, 15. There's starts to enter the gray area, and then between like 15 to 20, there's like between 15 and 20, you're, sometimes you're an adult, sometimes you're a child, you're kind of shifting it in between. But I think everybody can agree that, children are somebody that is like at least 14, 13 and below. I think that's, and then there's this gray area where you're moving from being a child into an adult. So it's not a really complicated thing to define. And yeah, there is a gray area, but there's also a clear, part there where a child is simply a child, and it's not gray. It's not hard to define. And then there's the question, like an adult, do we ever become an adult? That's a philosophical question that is not needed in the context of sex between adults and children. We don't need to philosophize like that in this context, because of what I'm going to tell you about the consequences. Okay, so when it comes to a child and adult, there's always an inherent power imbalance, because children are used to just not really having a say in a relationship with an adult. Most children, they go to play school, they go to school, and they're all the time there, and just usually in a parent-child relationship also, they're always in a situation where they're being told what to do by an adult, and they really don't have a say in it. So children are really used to just doing what adults tell them to do. And also they're used to trusting that, most of the adults around them have their best interest at heart. So there's this inherent trust from the child to the adult, and there's also the inherent power imbalance. So a child is very likely to just say yes to whatever an adult asks them to do because that's what they're used to doing. And because of this, I teach my children, never just say yes to anything that anybody tells you to do. Always question why. And then I know that we have whole of society against them, and so, you know, at least my voice is really just one voice in the group of many. But that, because of what I'm about to tell you, I tell my children, just don't say no. Never just say yes. Question everything. Anyway, but there is this inherent power imbalance in any kind of relationship with a child and an adult. And we know this when it comes to adults. Like, we know there's a power imbalance between, for example, a 20-year-old woman and a 40-year-old powerful politician, or a 20-year-old woman and a 30-year-old celebrity. There is an inherent power imbalance. And this power imbalance is way, way bigger when it comes to children and adults. And children, and also, then there's just like developmental factors. You know, a child's brain is not fully formed. They're living in a magical world, and you know, they don't know they have no idea what they're saying yes to. So a child cannot just say yes to sex and know what they're saying yes to, because they don't. They're completely unaware of what they're saying yes to. And it isn't until you move into this gray area where you start to even want to explore it. And then, you know, but I think this exploration should always take place between, you know, people that are in a similar developmental place. So not an adult and a child. That's my opinion. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you why this opinion is educated. So there's a lot of scientific studies that have been done when it comes to the consequences of childhood sexual abuse, and I will be very clear in my opinion. There is no such thing as sex between adults and children. There's only abuse between adults and children. And now I'm coming to why. And this is because of the consequences. And now I'm going to educate you about the consequences of childhood sexual abuse. So, and there's lots of scientific data behind this. And there is lived experience. I have been through childhood sexual abuse, and I know people that have been through childhood sexual abuse, and I know the consequences in my own life, and I know the consequences in the lives of people around me that have been through this. So this is both, you know, years and years of scientific data. You're clever. You can Google. You can just go on the internet. You can find the data, and also you can just like find anecdotal evidence anywhere. If you know about childhood sexual abuse and you look at the life of the person, you will see these things coming up. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the consequences. So the first consequence is what happens there when a child is sexually abused. It doesn't have to be sex. Any kind of erotic boundary crossing with a child can lead to this consequences. So light touch, what maybe an adult thinks is nothing, can lead to this consequences, and I have like anecdotal evidence to prove that. So the first direct consequence is that people are going to have problems when it comes to sex. So there's two ways to go that people normally go. Either way, you can't have sex and you don't have sex, and it's going to be having sex is something you maybe don't do, or it's going to be huge problems in your life for the rest of your life until you've gone through a deep healing process to heal that. That's one possible route that you will go to. The other thing that is much more common that happens is that you kind of erase the respect for the physical body and the sexual aspect of life. So people start having sex very young, and they have many sexual partners, and they just really don't care. You teach yourself to not really care. You do it. It's a defense mechanism, because you're telling yourself that what happened to you was okay, and sex is okay. Sex is just something that you do with anybody that wants to do it, and that's a very common route that people go down after childhood sexual abuse. And as another consequence of this lack of this lack of respect for yourself, and lack of respect when it comes to sex, then it's very common that people that were abused, sexually abused as children, are raped, and raped repeatedly often, because trying to protect yourself from not putting yourself into dangerous situation. I know there's lots of ways where you can't do anything to protect yourself, but anyway, you're much more likely to put yourself in a situation where rape is likely to happen, because there is no self-respect. There's this lack of boundaries. So rape is much more common, and often repeated rape, with people that have a history of childhood sexual abuse. Okay, so we're starting to get into the consequences, like lack of self-respect, the lack of respect for the sacredness of sex, and of Tantra is all about the sacredness of sex, and you lose that when you go through childhood sexual abuse. You use this lack of this idea of sex as something sacred, is something that is taken away from you by the abuse. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So, because these are not. This is just a tiny part of the consequences. Another consequence that is almost 100% likelihood of happening is some form of addiction. So it can be alcoholism, it can be drug abuse, it can be sexual addiction, it can be anorexia, bulimia, any kind of addictions, and are very common. And because addiction at the core is a coping mechanism. It's you're trying to cope, and so that's why addictions in any form are almost 100% of people that go through childhood sexual abuse develop some form of addiction. So if you abuse a child or you have sex with a child, there's almost 100% chance that you are directing the life of the child into a pathway where they're going to go into addiction. They're going to lose their self-respect when it comes to the physical body. You're increasing the likelihoods of rape. This is what you're doing when you're abusing a child. It's not just the act, it's the consequences. And there's a lot of statistics, and there's data behind everything that I'm saying. And I'm far from done. So another thing that is very common with people that have been abused sexually as children is going into a violent relationship, and relationship where there's abuse, where there's physical violence, sexual violence, of course, mental abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse. So as a direct consequence of the childhood sexual abuse, people are much more likely to go into a relationship where there isn't respect, and there is violence instead, in abuse in any kind of form. So that's another consequence of sexual abuse of children. And another thing is, and this is for women, during pregnancy and childbirth is very often very hard for any woman that's been through any kind of sexual abuse. And this, in the worst circumstances, this can lead to death of a child or death of the mother during childbirth. In Iceland, we live in a very, we have a very high-tech hospital system, so it's usually not the consequence. But in countries where there's less support when it comes to during childbirth, there's often a death of a child or death of a mother is often a direct consequence of childhood sexual abuse. And so that's when you're abusing a child, that's one of the things that you are possibly causing. Anyway, I'm going to keep going because I'm not done. Another thing that is very prevalent is self-harm. So cutting yourself, hurting yourself, any kind of self-harm. Of course, substance abuse is self-harm also, but it can also be like direct, like cutting yourself, hurting yourself, doing all kinds of things like that. And then the worst, often direct consequence of childhood sexual abuse is suicide. So self-harm, it goes to the extreme end, which is suicide. So when you're talking about sex between adults and children, and you say, you acknowledge yourself that you're not educated about it, you just like have this opinion maybe that's not based on anything, then well, so the abuse, the sexual abuse of a child, it's not just about the act, it's about the consequences of the act. And I've been talking now for the last 10 minutes or something about the consequences. So if you have any kind of sexual relations with a child, this is the path that you're directing their life into. And it takes decades often of healing to actually be capable of having a happy, fulfilled life. And it's not a given. It's just as likely that you will give up and you will just be in an abusive relationship your whole life, kill yourself from substance abuse, or actually physically take your life. And these are direct consequences of childhood sexual abuse. So what I'm talking about here, I'm not just criticizing this woman, I'm not just criticizing, I'm just talking because we as a society, we don't seem to know this. Because this is it's not just about like, just touching a child. It's about the consequences. And the consequences are what I've been talking about. And we have to start to acknowledge this and know this as a society so we can start to take this more seriously. And so if you are somebody that is hosting an event, and the event is doing something like this, you're mixing eroticism and psychedelic, substances, and you're bringing children into the mix. Let's say something goes wrong and a child experiences in this situation, which, when you're bringing psychedelics into the mix, it increases the likelihood of this, just like bringing children into a party where everybody's drinking also increases the risk of that. I personally know somebody that was sexually abused at a party at home because the parents were drunk, everybody was drunk, and the child in their bedroom was sexually abused. I mean, so it's not just psychedelic mushrooms, it's any kind of substance that changes the awareness, that takes away the awareness. So if you're somebody who's hosting an event where, you're creating the circumstances where the likelihood of this becomes possible, then if something happens to the child in that event, then who's responsible? Who's responsible of the consequences that almost automatically will follow? It's you who is holding the event that is responsible. It's not just the abuser. But if you're creating a container where this is possible, then who's responsible? And this is why I feel like I need to speak up, because I have lived the experience of childhood sexual abuse. It's horrible. It takes decades of healing, and healing is not a given. And so to take this lightly and just like not really think this through, just like maybe just listen to one TED talk and where they're talking about things like, that pedophilia is just a sexual orientation. I mean, seriously, if you think that, you have no idea what you're talking about, and you have no idea of the potential harm that you're causing. And it's just like, people, we need to do better. We need to do better than this. We need to completely protect children. And I think this all I don't know about this woman. I have my questions, but like anybody is holding an event, can we just be absolutely sure that the space is absolutely safe before we invite any, children. And from reading what this woman has been written, she is clearly not fit to hold this kind of event, because she says it herself. She doesn't know. She cannot, she has not educated herself enough to give an educated opinion. And if you haven't educated yourself enough, why would you hold it now and invite children? And then to go ahead and say, like, I didn't mean children when I specifically wrote children. I meant adults. And, well, I don't know what adults are. That's just a cover-up. Seriously, let's just be honest. I mean, isn't this what we're trying to do? We're trying to build a better world. And the first thing that we need to do if we're going to build a better world is protect children. Protect children from all the things that have been ongoing in our society for millennia. We need to stop childhood sexual abuse and all form of childhood abuse for us to be able to grow as a society. And one very basic way of doing this: do not create a container where it might possibly happen. I'm not saying it has happened or it will happen, but there's like mixing psychedelic mushrooms, erotic exploration, and children is a bad idea. When you know what I know about the consequences of any kind of mixing, any kind of erotica, any kind of touch that is of sexual nature, it can be just the tiniest thing, and it can turn around the life of the child for the worse. So just please think about what you're doing. I'm done speaking, and yes, have a good day.